Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Triple Option Podcast. I'm your co-host, Trudoglu, along with Nate Audrey and Avi Dingery. In today's episode, we are recapping week one of the USFL, as well as some takeaways from the games, what we're looking forward to now that we've seen some games, and most importantly, this the mascot of the Philly Stars, the Blob. Now, now that's out of the way, let's get into it. First, let's talk about some games. Nate, you watched more games than me or Abby did. What were some of your takeaways from some of the games that you witnessed?
Yeah, so let's go. Since there's only four games, we could probably just talk about each of them individually. So first off, we have the Generals versus Stallions, which was on Saturday night. It was the first game. A lot of hype, and this game to me was a little confusing because, in my opinion, I felt like the Generals were in command for most of the game. They had a pretty successful offense with both of their quarterbacks, which were in, and yet they seemed to slow down. They went through a period where they had DeAndre Johnson, which is the former Last Chance U quarterback, who was in, and they ran the ball for like 14 times in a row, I think, or something like that. And their offense just seemed to stall in the third and fourth quarters. And then that allowed Birmingham Stallions to come back late in the second half and eventually win the game. And I think a large contributor to that comeback was Jamar Smith, who came in at quarterback in the second half. He was a change, and he was by far like he helped a lot in their overall offensive efficiency because in the first half they were really struggling to do anywhere. I think they were down a good 10, 15 points. And, in the second half, he led them all the way back to a comeback and helped win the game. On the other hand, with the Generals, their quarterback Luis Perez had a pretty good game. He had somewhere near 200 passing yards, despite splitting time with DeAndre Johnson. And in my opinion, it was a little confusing because he got benched for DeAndre Johnson, and they ended up losing the game. So I'd like to see how he does going forwards. So yeah, that was the first game, and it was a 28-24 win for the Generals.
Yeah. Yeah, before we move on, just to clarify, so Jamar Smith was not starting at the beginning of this game, correct? If I remember
Correct.
correctly.
Jamar Smith was
Okay.
not starting.
Would
Instead,
you be surprised
yeah,
if he's being benched next week as well, or do you think as they figure
yeah.
out the
So
offense?
the starter Alex Magoo went out with an injury about
Uh,
halfway, like right around halftime, and he got subbed out. So assuming he is injured, obviously Jamar Smith was hurt, but I think that even if Magoo was healthy, after seeing how efficient Jamar Smith was, I would guess that Jamar Smith is their new starting quarterback going forwards.
yeah.
Another thing I'd like to point out about this game that kind of surprised me was both the running backs in this game had pretty good games with DeAndre Johnson, who was a quarterback. He almost rushed for 100 yards in his own right. Darius Victor for the Generals had 60 plus yards. I don't know. It was overall just it was real football. It wasn't what I was expecting, to be honest. Moving
Yeah.
forwards
I
to
think,
the next
real
game.
quick, I think
Oh
an
yeah,
interesting dynamic is going forward is to see what the Generals do with, having DeAndre Johnson and Luis Perez as two different quarterback styles completely, two different offenses you can build around, especially with the rules regarding two quarterbacks in the USFL. I think it can be a very dynamic offense. Possibly, well, granted, we don't know how these defenses play out, but based on what we've seen, this could be one of the better offenses in the league if things click.
Yeah.
yeah, I would agree with that. And it's kind of interesting. They have it almost seems like a quarterback dedicated for the run and dedicated for the passing game, and both were pretty efficient on Saturday. They just couldn't get the win, and so I agree. And like you said, the two forward passes is a thing in the USFL. I don't think anyone really implemented it this weekend, but that is a possibility going forwards, especially for a team like the Generals with two good quarterbacks.
Well, yeah, but like I'd say let's move on. The only thing I would say is don't expect too much innovation, at least early on. I mean, a lot of the coaches are like experienced guys, which is something you kind of want in the USFL too. Is like you want some reputable coaches to bring some more attention to the game, but I wouldn't expect too much playing around with the rules, at least early on. Okay,
Yeah,
let's
definitely.
move on to some
Yeah.
other games
So
this
the next
weekend.
game was on Saturday. That was between the Houston Gamblers and the Michigan Panthers. And so this game it started off, so it was between two pretty good teams. The Michigan Panthers obviously had the number one pick overall in the draft, which is former Michigan quarterback Shea Patterson, while the Houston Gamblers had quarterback Clayton Thorson, who is from Northwestern. And so the game started out with Houston scoring early, and Michigan had several good drives that they put together. Shea Patterson showed off his somewhat, he's a former five-star, and he showed off that ability in this game with several kind of wild scrambles where he's rolling out in the pocket, going 20, 30 yards downfield, throwing balls to the sideline. And yet, a lot of these drives amounted to no points. And so I think the turning point in this game was a 80-yard fumble recovery, scoop and score for a touchdown by one of the players that I chose as the impact player, Reggie Northrup, who was a linebacker. And he finished, with the fumble recovery, and he also had a good day overall. He had 11 tackles, five of which were solo. The other impact player I chose for the Gamblers was Donald Payne, who had 19 tackles as a
Oh
linebacker,
my
13 solo
god.
tackles, and one pass defended, which is just an absolutely insane day.
Okay. So, what do you think went wrong for the Michigan Panthers in this situation? Because you're saying like Shea Patterson like showed some ability. Do you think it was like he was being a bit too inconsistent, like the problems he had in college at Michigan, or do you think it's more of like just the kinks of still implementing the offense that should work themselves out?
Well,
So
to
the
be
damn
honest,
score
I think,
70 to
yeah,
12.
yeah, I think what he showcased was actually a result of the problem, which was the Panthers' O line. I think that they were getting beat on pass rush far too often, which forced Shea Patterson to scramble. And eventually, like the first two or three drives, Shea Patterson was just getting pressure within 1, 2 seconds of receiving the ball in his hands, which is just not manageable for any quarterback. You can't develop downfield routes with that. And I mean, it did result in him getting benched for Paxton Lynch, which shows like the Michigan coaches didn't know what to do either. They were trying to figure out a solution. I will say that another thing that did work well for the Michigan Panthers was their wide receiver Lance Lamar Jr. He had several circus catches. I think he had like two different sideline toe tapping catches. He had a touchdown, which he had made a good adjustment, and he had a fourth down conversion where he had a nice diving catch across the middle of the field. But yeah, going back to what you said about Shea Patterson, I think the problem was most likely the O line.
Yeah, I think that was kind of
That
expected coming in.
Yeah.
yeah,
And
that's
again, that
kind
is a testament to like how the Gamblers did. If you look at these two players alone, they weren't the only ones that had a great day. But yeah,
of yeah, for sure. This kind of connects back to a point I was making last episode. We're discussing how I think the key to the USFL having success is being an offensive super, is having a lot of offensive firepower. This game definitely kind of went against the grain of what I thought would be beneficial, but it was a good game to watch. I watched a bit of it. I definitely could see a more defensive brand possibly rising as a brand of the USFL. Uh, Avi, unless you got something else to add about this game, I say we move on to
Really,
some other games.
really, I think, at least based off this one game, I think Houston might pride itself in like a defensive identity as not only did Donald Payne and Reggie Northrup combine for 30 tackles, but they also had many members in like who were able to get pressure to the quarterback pretty quickly, and I think that could be their strong suit for now until talent develops. It's just the first year, so
yeah, the team as a whole had
Yeah,
3 sacks and 6 tackles for losses. So again, I would agree with both of you guys in saying that Houston does look to be a good defensive team, and we'll see how that plays out. As they play someone with maybe a better offensive line or more difficult offense.
yeah.
Moving forwards,
Okay.
we'll talk about the Stars and the Breakers, which actually Tarun and Abi will probably talk about more than I did since I was somewhat busy during this game.
Yeah. I watched about a half to three-quarters of this game. Pretty good game overall. As y'all can see, the score was fairly close. The Breakers were able to score a late touchdown, and the Stars just couldn't score in time. So when it came to the Breakers, they did have some offensive stars. They did have TJ Logan Jr. having almost 200 total yards. But the star for the Breakers is none other than Davin Bellamy, former Georgia linebacker. This man came out here had 3 sacks. Like obviously, it's not as hard as a league to play in as NFL or hell even the SEC. But to have 3 sacks is such a game-changing moment in a game that was decided by 6 points. However, Josh Medeiros of the Stars had something to say about that, coming in with 17 tackles. The former Nebraska man, as you can see if you are watching this on YouTube. Too. So I think again, while this was definitely a higher scoring game, there's still definitely some more defensive star power. There's definitely some signs of defensive star power here. Um, there's a good amount of turnovers to keep the game interesting. Um, and honestly, it was worth my time watching. I missed quite a bit of homework, but
Yeah.
to hell with
Okay.
it. I
I have
enjoyed
a
my
question for
time.
you. Yeah, given that I didn't watch the game, and that is, what do you think of the quarterback play from quarterbacks Kyle Sloter and Brian Scott with the Breakers
Um,
and the Stars, respectively?
well, the quarterback play was fairly conservative, to be honest. So Kyle Slaughter played decent. I believe 60 or 63% completion percentage, a touchdown and believe a touchdown interception, and
He
a
didn't have,
pretty
he didn't actually have
solid.
a touchdown, but he had 150 yards on the day, was
Oh yeah,
17 of
he
27
did have a
with one
touchdown.
interception.
You're correct there. And
Yeah.
then Brian Scott of the Stars did have quite a decent game. But was sacked 6 times. I think similar to the Michigan Panthers, there definitely could be a problem. There is a problem with the O line O line there because if you're throwing for 200 yards in a startup league while being sacked 6 times and watching the game, he was able to make some intelligent decisions when he had some time. I think if they can figure out the O line situation, this Stars team can fix some things because just like the Panthers, they didn't get their ass handed to them. Like, this is a close game. I think fixing the O line is a lot easier said than done, but even making minor changes I think would go a long way in improving this team because again, football is like a game of seconds, right? So buying like half a second or even a quarter of a second from the O line can make so much of a difference within a game in itself.
Yeah, I
So
completely agree with Tarun. With this being a startup league, I think the weakest point of talent currently is the offensive line. The quarterbacks are mostly, people who have shined in college, and same thing with a lot of these defensive stars. But the offensive line is something that's underlooked, and I think that moving forward could really take a team from just being just a middle of the pack team to clearly being better than everyone else.
Yeah, and one thing I will say, and this is just looking for the stats from this game, is that the Stars only rushed for 73 yards. So, as you know in football, if you don't establish your running game, the defensive line will just start rushing you endlessly. And I think that may have resulted in what you see, like large sack numbers, like 6 sacks in a game, or like so. I think that may have been part of the problem is that they didn't establish the running game. But
and the Breakers definitely had the better line though. Like Kyle Slaughter was not sacked a single time this game,
wow, it's kind of impressive.
which and the crazy thing is I know QBR is like an overused statistic in measuring the quality of a quarterback's play, but Scott had a 120.2 QBR versus Slaughter's 102.2. They're both very solid QBRs, but it shows the potential the Stars have if they can say get that 6 sacks to 5 for 4 game. Still not great, but again, football isn't a game of perfection; it's a game of inches. So
Yep.
I would say Hobby, unless you or Nate have any other um opinions about the outcome of this game, I say we move on to other pending matters, including the last game we talked about and
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
other
So yeah, the
thoughts.
last game is of course was today, which we are recording on Monday, which was between the Tampa Bay Bandits and the Pittsburgh Maulers. And this game, for me personally, was the one I was looking forward to the most, of course, because former Ole Miss quarterback Jordan Ta'amu is the starting quarterback for the Tampa Bay Bandits. And right from the beginning, this game was exciting. I mean, the first drive, which went to the Tampa Bay Bandits, was straight down the field. Joe and Talman went like 5 for 5 for 60 yards. They scored with a 5 yard touchdown run. I mean, it was it really set the tone for what I thought was going to be a high scoring, exciting game. And I was blown away when the Pittsburgh Maulers came out for the first drive because they lined up with a 9 man on the line, one running back in I formation, setup where they literally just ran the ball straight forwards with as many linemen as possible, and I got stuffed 3 runs in a row, and I was like, oh no, this might be a blowout. But Jordan Teamu, they got slowed down a little bit in their following drives. Jordan Teamu had a couple of interceptions, one of which, in my opinion, wasn't necessarily his fault due to a wide receiver tipping it up in the air. But overall, the Pittsburgh Maulers just struggled heavily on offense. They showed good play action concepts at times, but they didn't couple it with good running game, and so it was just kind of all over the place. And in the second half, when their defense held Tampa Bay to 0 points, the Pittsburgh Maulers' offense could not answer, and that resulted in the game ending in a 17-3 victory for the Bandits. I think
Yeah,
that, yeah, oh yeah, what were you saying?
yeah, Pittsburgh Maulers definitely, for the time being, established himself as the worst team in the USFL. I know we should probably get some time for let the coaches establish their schemes, because obviously the off season for the USFL teams wasn't as long as for other professional sports leagues. However, it definitely isn't looking great for the Maulers either. I don't really think there's that much to say about this game necessarily, but I don't know about Joe, but I think this is a perfect segue to talk about what
Yeah, I will
how
say,
this
just let me cut you off for a bit right there before we move on. I'd
ain't
like
a
to talk
problem.
about, yeah, a couple players I liked from this game. Uh, for one, I wanted to say, as much as I wanted to say Jordan Sam for, yeah, the Bandits, I couldn't actually like justifiably say it because Cheyenne O'Grady had a great game today. I mean, on that first drive that I talked about, he was a huge part of why they went down the field so fast. He finished with a total of 86 receiving yards on on 8 receptions and 11 targets. And Shine O'Grady, as you can see, again, if you're watching on YouTube, he was a standout player at Arkansas, and he looks poised to have a good season here with the USFL. On the other hand, and I'm likely going to pronounce this wrong, is Kiava Tezino, who is a linebacker for the Pittsburgh Maulers. And I think he probably sums up like how the Maulers defense played today. He finished with 12 tackles, 9 solos, 2 tackles for loss, 1 interception, and 2 passes defended. I mean, guy had an absolutely great game. And I think that kind of, shows how, although the Pittsburgh Maulers offense struggled due to the fact that they're using an offense from the 1980s, it seems like their defense was pretty stout in the end, especially against which was what was considered to be one of the better offenses in the USFL coming into the season. So I think that
Yeah,
is probably a good thing, a bright point for the the Pittsburgh Maulers going forwards.
yeah. I don't blame you for confusing them with the Steelers. I mean, their logo is kind of obvious to where their influence is from, but I don't know. I'm not even mad
I
about the
thought you were going to take
Maulers.
a subtle dig there at the Steelers' quality of play.
No, I'm only going to take a dig at the horrendous uniforms. Like, I don't know what this inverse Clemson shit is, but I don't know if I like it.
Kind of looks disgusting. Just a quick segue with the Bandits. They scored all of their 17 points in this game in the first half. Do you think this could be a concern for them going forward, having like a very like faltering offense in the second half that we've seen
I
with
mean,
many other NFL teams or any
I just
other
wasn't.
football teams in the past?
I was just surprised they didn't use JF3 even more, because like I know all of us watched Last Chance U. I believe he was in the very first season. I'm trying to remember the name of the quarterback. Like he's battling with that EMCC, but like the thing about JF3 or John Franklin III is he's not a great technical quarterback. Like he's not going to make the throws that Teamo can make, but he adds an athleticism to the game. Now, Teamo isn't like a slouch by any means, but he adds an athletic aspect to the game that's very hard to replicate. I think if if the Bandits use this correctly in a league that doesn't have as many great athletes, I think they can put 40 a game if they use both quarterbacks efficiently. Like I'm saying that like it sounds cringe, but like that's my 2 cents.
Yeah,
Possibly
and
they should use him at wide receiver. I think with the way that the league has been dictated so far, a wide receiver of J3 speed would just be on a whole different level.
It would be an insane slot, honestly.
Oh, one quick note about the Bandits that I kind of noticed. Most of Tampa seemed to very heavily rely on Shannon O'Grady. With I'm pulling up the stats right now. 8 of Tampa's 20 completions were to O'Grady, with 11 of his attempts being to O'Grady. It seems like he definitely has a good connection with his tight end and might be favoring him down the line.
Yeah, I can actually speak to this. This is the thing I noticed during the game is that I'm not sure if how many other quarterbacks in the USFL seem to be doing this, but Te'amu did a pretty good job of taking his checkdowns instead of forcing throws into wider windows. And so a lot of the times, Cheyenne Grady was that little, 6 yard, 7 yard, out and back route that yeah he got, and then he also found O'Grady several times when being blitzed. He slipped out and then found him for a good 5 6 yards and avoided a sack. So I think that Te'amu is just showing off his good decision making by finding check down players and completing passes like two easy options like Cheyenne O'Grady. Yeah, just to pivot, like also what we're talking about, I'd say that one problem that the Maulers had was that, and I cannot believe that they announced this on the broadcast, but apparently they only had three active wide receivers on the roster, which does not sound like a successful plan, like just a successful situation to have in a league that's going to be based around offense overall.
Yeah. Um, Definitely concerning. I think that's a great segue to our next topic, which is an like an analysis of the overall games this week and how that impacts our outlook on the USFL. Before we get to that, we got the standings themselves. This isn't an official standings release from the USFL itself. This is just a point differential standings that was designed by Nate, as y'all can see. Um, Almost, I believe, Nate, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the USFL divides its teams by southern and northern divisions. It seems like the southern division is them taking decisive lead over their northern counterparts. Definitely will change, or probably will change as the season goes on, injuries, scheme changes, and such. But I think this standings chart will become a lot more interesting as the weeks progress.
Yeah,
I think
you are
it's
correct to say that the league is divided into north and south, and funnily enough, like you said, every single southern team beat their northern team opponent this week. So all the teams you see in the top half of the table are the southern teams, and the bottom half of the table are the northern teams.
yeah.
Very
Moving
interesting.
forwards,
I
we're
mean, the
probably
best
gonna talk.
football is down here for a reason.
Yeah, I mean it's the South, it's football. I mean they just go hand in
Yeah.
hand.
Okay.
But moving forwards,
Yeah.
going to
Moving.
discuss now our overall takeaways from this week and what we think about the going forwards for the USFL. Jordan, you
Yeah.
want to start us off?
I guess I. Yeah. More than happy to appreciate it. So I guess some of my takeaways from week one when it comes to my overall outlook on the USFL. Honestly, it's some pros obviously are being a viewership, I believe, topped around 3.5 million, average around 3 million, is expected when a new league begins. I'd be very interested to see how that viewership sustains itself, because you have to remember the AAF and the XFL in their inaugural seasons both had very successful opening weekends, but the problem was more for the AAF than the XFL was somewhat of an exponential decline in that viewership. So I think, and that's where this kind of leaves my concern. The games were great for football junkies like us, but the key to a league like the USFL being successful is you can't just appeal to the football junkies. Because say take college football junkies for example, they're going to focus on multiple things: spring training, the offseason, the draft, and the NFL, all of these other factors, right?
Recruiting.
The key for the US, yeah, exactly. The key for the USFL to have success is attracting typical like casual football fans. But I think with low scoring games make that very difficult. Like hot take, I think most of the defensive games were more because of shitty offense more than anything else.
That's a good point. I will say though that I think that there are several things that USFL has done to make it more interesting than a typical football game. And this is not even football quality like aspect. You look at just the actual broadcasts. I mean, they provided several different there were several things in the broadcast this weekend that I found very interesting. For one, they had drone footage, which was very cool. I thought it provided a lot of cool shots, especially on kickoffs and any special team moments, just because of the flyby that you get. Plus, you get all these like unique little close-up views. I think at one point saw the drone inside of the huddle, which I'm not sure how realistic that is, but still, that seems cool. They also had these helmet cams, which provided a couple cool moments. You saw, I think one of the more popular clips from this weekend was an interception by a Breakers linebacker, and you could see him like look at the ball come at him, tip it up in the air, and then catch it, and then run it in for a return, which is kind of interesting. Thirdly, I think that was the thing that I found the most entertaining, and this does kind of appeal to the football junkie side of this, but there were periods in the broadcast. I don't know if it was on NBC, but it definitely was on the Fox broadcast for several games, where since they have mics on, like I said last episode, 16 players total, along with the coaches, the commentators would just went silent for a period of about 5 minutes for like one drive, and then all you heard as a viewer was communication between the players and the coaches. And I found that fascinating as as a player, as a fan, casually, because you get to just see what football actually is like at that level. You can hear all the communications between players. So it was kind of cool to hear, a head coach and talking to it in his headset, reading out the plays from the play sheet. And then hear a quarterback, nod his head, walk into the huddle, and then read out that same play to all the players on the field. So I thought that was an
Yeah,
interesting aspect.
definitely. But my pushback, I guess, to that argument, I'll let you speak it in a sec, obviously. But I think my pushback to that argument is that like these are all very great innovations, but I think they only work when they complement good football. They can't really replace a quality product, right? I think the product has to get a lot better. And like I love good defense, like low scoring games, but I think from an overall business perspective, as a startup league, you need high powered offense. And I'm no business analyst, I'm just like a high schooler, but like that's just how I view it based on what happened to AAF and the XFL near the end of their tenures. So
Just
I
want to,
think,
real quick, I just want to bring up a
yeah,
question. With this league, the league being started and the issues we've seen across multiple teams and how often it's being executed and like the positions, do you think that the positional value of offensive line is a lot increased than compared to college football or the NFL?
I think it may
I
be
don't know
more
if it's
apparent. I
increased,
feel like
but like,
offensive line is like overall a pretty valuable position. But like we say, if we're able to see these large sack numbers like this as casual fans, I'm sure coaches will, organizations will, and that will cause their value to increase.
I'm saying this because like usually a lot of people will value an elite wide receiver over an elite offensive lineman, but maybe in this league, that offensive lineman has a lot more value and ability than let's say that receiver. So I just
I
wanted to
mean,
ask that.
I don't think that value necessarily changes within a fan's perspective, but like I think this applies
So in, in,
across
the, in, the, in
football.
the
Like a
sense of like
valuable
team
O
building,
lineman.
Yeah, team
Oh yeah,
building.
for sure. I don't even think it'd be more like NFL players, NFL teams already value O linemen a lot. Like, why do you think like left tackles get paid a ton? That's
I mean,
arguably one of the most
to be
important
fair, left
positions
tackles
on
get
the.
paid more due to that like Lawrence Taylor stigma, but
Yeah,
I don't know. That's weird.
casual Ole Miss example. Laramie Tunsil makes triple million-dollar figures just as an O lineman, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like the thing is, because I mean, most football people who are in this business, regardless of like USFL, NCAA, XFL, NFL, whatever the hell it is, hell, even high school, realize that like a good O lineman makes your entire team better.
Yeah,
Like
yeah. I mean,
like the
I agree.
Cowboys
I mean,
having a good O line makes Dak Prescott and makes all these other players look better, right? So the same way, I think that's going to happen in the USFL. Like there's going to be a prioritization of getting high quality O linemen. Now the problem is you're not getting the cream of the crop talent. So I think the problem for the USFL is how do you get the most out of the talent that you've accumulated?
yeah. Kind of like just talking about like that whole overall like talent you accumulate. Do you guys think it'll be a problem that the roster size is at 45? Like, do you think injuries will start to become a problem with such small roster
Oh,
sizes?
for
Because I was
sure.
noticing this weekend where like if you have 1, 2 players hurt every week, that's 10, 20 players over the course of a season. those are people on the field. Those are your starters. Like you gotta wonder like what do teams look like 5 6 weeks into a 10 game season with such small rosters?
Yeah, honestly, I agree with you. I think it's going to be a problem. And like, I think as far as I looked in the injury report this week, it seemed to be a lot of like a lot of like hamstrings, a lot of issues like that. A lot of stuff
Because they're
that
playing on turf.
happens when. Say it
My
again.
bad. It's because they're playing on turf, in my opinion. But yeah, yeah, continue. I cut you off there. My bad. I just that's what popped
Turf.
in my head.
Yeah, turf. No, no problem. I just can hear you. Hear you. Turf definitely plays a role, but I think um, Abi's a, me and Abi are definitely basketball fans as well. I think Abi will recall when there's a lot of like worries about like constant basketball injuries after the COVID year, but the entire theory was, hey, shorter off season, less time to rest. That's probably it. If you think about it, a lot of these dudes either just came off of playing overseas or maybe they haven't worked out in a while. Either one will lead to some of these issues with injuries that aren't necessarily because of like bad luck, but it's like your body hasn't reached a certain level, whether that's enough rest or enough training to be accustomed to taking those hits or taking those twists and turns. So I think while the injury numbers will go down, I think the roster size has to be 50 to be 50, 53 to be sustainable at least. But like I get why it's at 45 because like you need to balance player salary to encourage players to join the league and having enough players to keep the league as a league. So I know I kind of rambled, but
Yeah, yeah. I think you bring up a good point there. But like you said, like they are coming. Like you got players coming out of I haven't played in a while. Anywhere from like I haven't played in a while, but ooh, let me do this. I think best example I give of that is the kicker for the Generals was a soccer player who's playing his first football game ever this weekend, which is kind of funny. Yeah, but and then you also have the players who are coming from the CFL, coming from training camp, like an entire season with a scout team slash training camps, and so I think that does play a part into the conditioning. And like you said, like
like
roster
hell,
stuff, like
Jordan
I
Tamlin
agree.
himself, like
Yeah, I mean he's with the Chiefs and several other teams during this year trying to make a roster. But I think like you said, it is kind of good that they have smaller roster sizes. I think the salary right now per week for players is like 4,500, which that's
oh
not that
yeah.
bad
So
considering
how it
it's
works
10 game.
is 4,500 guaranteed. I believe it's an additional 850 if you win, if your team wins, and then I believe it's a 45K minimum and a 70K maximum. And that's not the entire year, that's the season itself. So you can still work like some job in the rest of the year. So yeah,
Well,
I
real quick, because the season is somewhat, it's not that long, and the pay is not super. Do you think there's a possibility a lot of like NFL free agents might consider this league as a way to like exhibit their skills if they haven't been signed, and then come NFL season get picked up last minute?
Yeah,
um
one thing I would say that is kind of interesting about that is that a lot of the players that I think if not all of the players that signed this year signed 2 year contracts, which the USFL did, to try and combat to prevent players from joining the XFL when that comes out. But if they do, introduce 1 year or maybe even like 1 season contracts, I could definitely see that being a possibility because I think it is a good place to showcase your own football
well,
skills on a
I mean
American stage.
they already have clauses that I'm pretty sure the contracts already have clauses to allow you to go to the NFL.
No,
Yeah,
that's a good point. I didn't think about that.
there's probably a contract issue around there somewhere. I know different
Yeah.
sport, different league, but I know during the 2012 lockout, a lot of players were not able to like play in like pro am leagues or like or in Europe during the lockout because of their NBA contracts. But it would definitely be interesting to see like a lot of NFL free agents who are elite talents come to the USFL and demonstrate their skill sets.
I don't know if that would happen necessarily because like that's still their off season, right?
That is true.
Yeah. And then
But like,
honestly,
but
I'd
like
say
random free agents. So
we
like,
gotta wrap up.
imagine Tavon Austin in the USFL. Like he's not gonna get signed by
No,
the
but
NFL
Tavon
team.
Austin ain't got an NFL future. Well, yeah,
But he,
that's kind of different. That's like, hell, like, I've made my money. I still like football. I'll make a little extra bread. I'm doing what I love. That's different from like, say, like a Jadeveon Clowney trying to like resurrect a career that's like mysteriously gone by
Marshawn
the
Lynch.
wayside.
I don't know if
Skittles,
Marshawn should
man.
be. I don't think
Uh,
he should be playing football anymore.
just can you imagine though, like him just going and styling on these people trying to make it to the pros the first time? That'd be kind of funny. I will say that like the league has said that their ideal players are people who have been in training camps slash, got drafted low and then didn't pan out, and they've been like in the league for about 3 to 5 years. They did say that that's their ideal type of players. So I think that is a possibility.
Sure.
I think the USFL will try to promote or try their best to try and get these type of players into the league. So yeah,
Okay, I think that's a good place to stop on the takeaways. Um, let's move on
that
to
that
the most
yeah,
important topic.
the most important topic by far of this entire podcast. So if you're still listening, don't leave
Now,
now. This is the
before
best
we
part.
move on to this topic, I'd like to remind everyone that the Triple Option Podcast does not support violence of any kind. Um, we're an anti-violence podcast,
That being
so
said,
do
Viewer
do
discretion is
take it as a
advised.
joke.
without further ado,
And let's move on to the blob.
welcome to the Philadelphia Stars USFL official mascot, the Blob.
But I swear, to God, all of Philly's sports like mascots are just an entire ad of why you shouldn't do drugs.
I
Like,
will say
what the
really quick,
actual hell is
if you're
this?
listening to this and not watching this like the video or the slideshow, either switch to the tab that you have this open on or Google it because you are missing out.
Like, what the hell is
Philadelphia
this
has to
supposed
be
to
a
be?
wild city. Is this just like this reminds me of one of the monsters from Monsters University, or like one of those Pixar movies. It just doesn't seem real. It kind of matches with a lot of like the Philly mascots. You see that with the Flyers and their like orange Oscar looking
Gritty.
mascot.
It's called Gritty, I
Yeah,
think.
gritty.
Really?
What a name.
And then you also got the Philly Fanatic.
Yeah, gritty is in the field. They're just
Yeah. I mean,
crazy.
obviously you can tell like the league's trying to make this seem like a Philadelphia team. They chose to follow that trend. But I mean, the other ones look weird. This thing acts weird. If you look at any videos of it, like this announcement video on Twitter, it's like just sitting there like I don't know how
Like,
to
if
properly
you're
describe
watching
the
this
motion it was
on
doing.
YouTube, look at the
Image on
image
the
on the left. We're not gonna describe what we think's gonna happen. That's up to
Imagination.
you and your
and
demons.
this was
But
like this was at a
yeah.
USFL game. This was not like some like promo. This was at halftime during the USFL game with live audience in attendance.
I still don't get what the hell this is supposed to be. Like, you're the. Oh, first of all, why is the Philadelphia team called the Stars? Isn't that like a Texas thing? Isn't
Well, I
the
think
entire
this is
point
because
of
these are
Philly
the
that they
original names they
kind of
had
don't
back
like
in the
Dallas?
80s. These are the names they had in
Yeah,
the 80s, like the original
Oh,
USFL.
shit, you're right.
that makes sense. Michigan
Please,
Panthers.
I don't know how I forgot that.
Yes, obviously.
Panthers in Michigan.
Yeah.
I feel like the Blob is
I'm
the
not sure if I like the
USFL's.
image on the right either. It kind of.
Oh yeah, it's kind of scary. But
You're just about to say what I think you're about to say. You're about to say like the Blob is the USFL summed up into one mascot or
no,
something like that.
no, no. The Blob is the USFL's version of like Benny the Bull, just a wild mascot that is really weird but can
No,
be
Benny the Bull
lovable.
has respect.
No, no, no.
No, no,
Benny,
no, no.
Benny does,
Benny the
Benny
Bull is
does,
a
does,
respectable
no, Benny
mascot.
does dumb stuff, but like, he's also
Benny
the
the Bull
coolest
treats women
mascot.
with respect. I don't know about the Blob, man.
Benny the Bull has probably costed the Bulls millions of dollars in popcorn debt. This is the Blob might be doing that with like
I mean, it's just
Philly cheesesteaks.
popcorn though.
Lawsuits.
Like, he's still valuable
Lawsuits.
because all the man does is roast Knicks fans.
I don't know, man. The Blob looks like
I,
it's
I, I
gets in
want
like
I want to see the Blob what the Blob does at a home game, just like with
yeah. I mean, sadly
packed
that won't happen.
fans.
Sadly that won't happen because again, all the games are being played in Birmingham this year. But in the future, if the USFL does continue to prosper, maybe one day when games are moved to the home cities of the teams, we can see an angry mob of Philadelphia fans getting riled up by the Blob doing his special dance in front of all of the fans. One can only hope. I think that probably sums up
Okay,
this week's episode. So thanks again for watching. I'm your co-host Nate Autry. Remember to like and subscribe if you're seeing this on YouTube. We'll be releasing hopefully consistent USFL content every week, previewing and recapping the weekends, as well as some draft content as that approaches. I'm your co-host Nate Autry, along with Tarun Duglu and Abhi Degray.